Well, welcome everyone. I have 12:16, so I think we're going to get started. It's great to be together today. Welcome, my name is Alan Ewing-Merrill. I serve as the Executive Director of the BTS Center, a private foundation located in Portland, Maine, building on the legacy of the former Bangor Theological Seminary. Guided by the vision of human hearts renewed, justice established, and creation restored, the BTS Center seeks to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. We do that by offering theologically grounded programs of continuing education and spiritual formation, including workshops and retreats, learning cohorts, public conversations, and projects of applied research. Today, we're so glad to welcome you to this event, a Fireside Chat with Liz Magill, who's a pastor, an author, and a workshop leader. And I'll introduce Liz in just a moment. Today, I am joined by two other members of the BTS Center team. Kay Ahmed, you can wave Kay, is our office manager, and she's going to be coordinating the recording of this event, streaming to Facebook Live and managing the comments there, and managing behind the scenes details to make sure everything goes smoothly. And Nicole Deeroff, wave Nicole, is our program director. Nicole is going to be managing the chat box during our event and taking care of any security issues if they come up. So thank you to Kay and Nicole for being with us today. Now, before I introduce my conversation partner for this event, I want to invite all of you to take a minute just to say hello in the chat box. Offer a greeting and tell us where you're logging in from today in the chat box. We especially want to welcome those who may be joining us on Facebook Live as well. And you can use the comments on Facebook in the same way. Take a minute to say hello and tell us where you're logging in from. I see we have people from Scarborough, Maine, from Vermont, a couple from Vermont, from Windham, from North Dakota, from Belgrade Lakes, Maine, Penobscot, Warren, lots of places in Maine, Yarmouth. We have someone from Liverpool in the UK. I think, Kenny, you may win a prize for that, for traveling the longest distance to join our Zoom room today, from Hopedale, Massachusetts, and from lots of other places. One of the nice things about COVID and moving all of our programming online, California, good morning, yes. One of the nice things is that geography is no limitation. There are no constraints geographically, so we are glad to have people joining us from all over. And now let me take a minute to introduce our guest, my conversation partner for this Fireside Chat. It's so good to have with us the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Mae Magill, known to most people as Liz, a writer, a pastor, and a workshop leader living in Berlin, Massachusetts. I used to live in Hudson, Massachusetts, so I know that the correct pronunciation is Berlin, not Berlin. Am I right?
That's correct. Berlin.
Berlin, right. Liz is the author of this book, Five Loaves, 2 Fish, 12 Volunteers, Growing Relational Food Ministry. Such a great title and a great book. She's also the founder of Worcester Fellowship, an outdoor church in Worcester, Massachusetts, reaching adults without homes. Liz is a graduate of Episcopal Divinity School when it was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in 2017, she earned her Doctorate of Ministry degree from Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. An experience that I know played a significant part in the writing, researching, and publishing of this book. Ordained with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination, Liz serves in interim pastor roles within the United Church of Christ in Massachusetts. She's currently pastoring Ashburnham Community Church in Ashburnham, Massachusetts. Liz loves crafts, music, skiing, travel, and her husband, Ken. And as I learned before we started, she also loves toasty toes. So she has a heater right at her feet to keep her feet warm as we begin our conversation. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. This is really fun for me.
Great. Well, Liz, you and I met a couple of months ago because my friends, Shantia and Jonathan Wright Gray, who may be with us today, both retired pastors, had just been to a gathering, I think online, where you spoke. And I think almost immediately, they called and said, we just heard this great speaker and we think she'd be perfect for a BTS Center event. You've got to meet Liz. So I'm so glad that we did have a chance to meet, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So you've just written this excellent book, 5 Loaves, 2 Fish, 12 Volunteers, which explores the topic of church-related food ministries. We're talking about food pantries, soup kitchens, community meals programs. And in this book, you're inviting congregations to make the shift, as I think of it, from what is, at least what often is, to what if, what could be. So you're asking questions like, what if a direct service food ministry could be better? What if it could be more meaningful, more efficient, more impactful if it made the shift from being purely transactional, that is, volunteers show up, volunteers are in control, they dispense the food or serve the meal while guests receive the food or consume the meal. What if they could make the shift from being purely transactional to being relational? That is, really centering the ministry around genuine, mutual, human connection between people. But you go one step further. You make this audacious and really inspiring claim that this actually is the work of building the church, that in this relational approach to sharing food mutually, eliminating this typical us and them dynamic so that it's really just one big collective us, that this actually is church. So I wonder, Liz, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got to be in that place. What got you involved in exploring these questions in the first place? And what led you to this insight that you share so passionately in your book? And as you're responding to that question, if there's a passage from your book that you'd like to read, I'd invite you to do that as well.
Thank you, Alan. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this. Certainly, this started with me not doing very good, what I would consider very good ministry early on. I did a new church start. It was reaching homeless and at-risk people in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I had studied at Episcopal Divinity School at what the Episcopalians call baptismal ministry, the idea that every church has all the skills that it needs to be the church that it is. It doesn't need experts and other people to come in. And I went off to a workshop on small churches, and they asked me what was the ministry of my church. And I said it was feeding people. And even as I said the words out loud, I thought, I don't let my congregation feed anyone. That what was going on at Worcester Fellowship is that indoor churches that have buildings were bringing lunch and serving it to outdoor people who don't have a place to live. And I want to be clear that everyone who was coming was doing it in a very relational way. Their experience was that they got to know people. They talked about how much they loved doing it because of the people they knew. So we were building relationships, but we weren't going to the next step, which was to say the members of the church can serve food. So I set out to do a doctoral project to show that in indoor churches, we can do the same thing that I was doing in an outdoor church, which is that we can create relationships where everyone is welcome to belong. Everyone gets a turn to do the sharing.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a journey.
It was a journey, like most of ministry, right? We mess up a lot, we stumble, and then somehow God hits us beside the head and says, hey, there's another way to do this.
Yeah.
Is there a passage in your book that you want to share to illustrate this journey that you've been on?
I don't have one about that in particular, about what I ended up just saying.
Okay, no worries. We'll keep going. I know those will come up.
Yeah.
So your book starts out, like paragraph 1 on page 1 with the story of Alan. Now that I was drawn to that story, first of all, because you're a great storyteller, but also my name is Alan. But in telling your readers about this particular Alan, you're pretty honest. You're even a little bit more than a little bit vulnerable. You found Alan annoying, right? No sugarcoating. He rubbed you the wrong way. So
Way.
tell us a little bit, tell us about Alan, about your early encounters with him, about how he got under your skin, and then how your perspective shifted and how he actually ended up being a kind of a pivotal person in your own journey with food ministries.
Yeah. Yeah, Alan changed my life. And I will read a little bit from that. This is from the opening of the book. Alan annoyed me from the first day I met him. He wore oversized shoes, a too small coat, worn out jeans, and a severe look on his face. I wore a church dress, a fitted jacket, a smile, and a stole that proclaimed my ecclesiastical authority. He was in his early 50s, just like me. He grew up in an all-white neighborhood like mine, where dads worked nights and moms stayed home with children or worked secretarial jobs. As kids, we were both taught that we could succeed in life. I went to college, earned a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and later a doctorate. Alan worked retail. When I met him, he didn't have housing or a job. An alcoholic, he lived at the bus station. He had a don't tell me what to do attitude. I owned a house in the suburbs, was part-time pastor of an outdoor church, and didn't want to be told what to do either. Alan and I met on a Sunday at Worcester Fellowship, an outdoor church in Massachusetts for people who don't have homes or are food insecure, where I ministered to people in the lunch line. Alan waited in the cold with hundreds of others for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a bag of chips. He showed up sometime after the city built an ice rink on the downtown common. Worcester Fellowship held its lunch and worship time at the corner of the common furthest from the skaters. Alan was a complainer. Every single thing that we did, he had some comment about how we did it wrong. And I think you can hear from what I said at the beginning, some of the pain for me is that he was just like me. I didn't like the stuff we did wrong either. He would ask why we didn't start lunch yet, and I was also anxious of why we hadn't started on time. He would critique how the line worked. I also didn't think it was working very well. But the breakthrough for me came when I realized that his experience in working retail meant that he actually knew how to do it better. That my complaints were, it doesn't seem like it's working right. His complaints were, there is a solution to this and I know it. So he ended up taking over our food ministry. He ended up being in charge of how we did food. And we ended up making a lot of changes to our ministry based on the advice that he gave us about what order things should be, how close they should be in the line. I will say, Alan, that part of what was frustrating about Alan for me is he didn't want to get known. He didn't want to share. He only wanted to help us do it right. He didn't want to tell. So I don't know a huge amount about him because every effort I made to get to know him, he kind of rebuffed. But the world changed when when I figured out that he knew what he was doing and I didn't know how to do a food ministry.
I so appreciate your honesty and humility in naming that. You know, I find, and probably many of us do if we're honest, that the things that annoy me most about other people are often the things that annoy me about myself, and I'm just not quite ready to acknowledge that. Yeah. So I appreciate your humility in being able to finally say, actually, Alan, you've been driving me crazy, but you have a spot and I actually need you because you can make this ministry better. So what advice do you have for individuals or congregations that have a food ministry that kind of fits your description of a transactional ministry? Maybe they have a clear distinction between the volunteer, that's the person with privilege and power, the one holding the spoon, doling out the food, filling the bags of groceries. and then the guests who are coming because they are experiencing food insecurity. Often those lines are drawn and they're pretty clear, and that's the way we've always done it around here. But maybe this individual or congregation wants to take steps to becoming more relational. Or maybe they really are trying to be relational, but there's just something that keeps them from going to the next step of really sort of welcoming, embracing, including those who not only wish to eat, but also wish to volunteer, to be part of this thing, right? To own the ministry, not to be objects of the ministry, but to be shared ministry partners. What advice do you have for that individual or congregation?
Yeah. So I want to be clear that I interviewed hundreds of churches over the phone about their food ministry, and all of them wanted to be relational. This was not a question of people wanting to be and stay away from those people. They all wanted to be relational. What I thought that I was going to find about these churches that I visited is that they started by meeting with people, eating with people, getting to know them, and then heard from them what their skills were. Kind of the experience that I had at Worcester Fellowship. But in fact, all of these churches that are doing this ministry were much more, it started in a different place than I expected, which is that rather than saying to people in churches, you need to go eat with people, they started inviting people to volunteer first. A couple of them only did it to solve a problem. One of them was having noise in their food pantry line. The neighbors were complaining about the crowds. So they said, you can come in early and help us set up. Totally self-centered. They were saying, we're going to make it so we'll stop getting these complaints. So we'll invite you in to help set up. And what happened is that it's actually easier to meet people when you work together than when you're just trying to make conversation sitting at a table or in a line. The work of setting up the tables together, the work of dividing the canned goods from the frozen goods and figuring out which table they should be at, and the work at sweeping up afterwards and washing dishes, all of that is a place that it feels good to be in relationship with people, and you don't have to figure out how to make small talk because you have something to talk about. You have the project of doing the work. So the book is set up that build a relationship, then let people volunteer, then create church. But in fact, the first step is often to let people volunteer. I also want to tell you about, I'm a newlywed. I got married in 2012 as already an old person. And I had this challenge of becoming part of my husband's family. Whenever I visited, they were very quick to anything I offered to do. They said no. They said, sit. No, sit. We'll serve you. We'll make breakfast. And anything I asked to do, they said no to, which they did.
They were trying to be good hosts, right?
Exactly. They did out of love. But I realized a couple years into this that I was a guest until the day they let me help wash the dishes. And once I could wash the dishes, I was a member of the family.
Wow.
It's the same thing that happened in these churches, is that once you say to people, you can be one of the volunteers. When I interviewed these volunteers, they used words about belonging. I belong to this church. This church is my home. And that grew out of the fact that they got to be one of the volunteers that helped with the work.
One of the things I think is really neat about that is it sounds like you heard these same themes across hundreds of faith communities across the country. So there's this common dynamic, and it's kind of universal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's universal, and it kind of grows out of when we talk about Jesus, we have this view. I had this view, and I'm going to guess that you all had this view too, but maybe not, but that Jesus went around feeding people. And when we actually look at our scriptures, Jesus didn't go around feeding people. Jesus went around
Right.
with people and letting people feed him. And that, like, the light went on in my brain that 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 there's so easy to think that I'm being like Jesus when I give my stuff to you. But Jesus was an acceptor of a gift, an accept gifts from people. I don't tell this story in the book, but the story of the 72 being sent out and they don't bring anything with them, that meant that their first job of ministry was to ask other people for help, find a place to stay. That like changed my whole view of the world of Christian ministry when I
Yeah.
realized that letting other people do what they have skills at is my way of being in ministry with them.
Yeah. The church that I'm part of, Hope Gateway in Portland, Maine, for many years had a community meals program. We had a downtown space that we're no longer in, but in that space, we served, I don't know, 75,000 meals over the course of maybe 6 or 7 years. And it was very much everybody sits down around the table and eats together. It was a very much a shared ministry, relational, and everybody helped set up the tables and everybody swept up afterwards. But I will tell you, like from my personal experience, I was more comfortable standing in the kitchen on the other side of that counter serving the meal than I was sitting down across the table from someone that maybe had a different life experience than me, maybe looked like he slept outside last night. I made myself do it, but there's a vulnerability that happens when we push ourselves out of our comfort zone and really focus on the relationship first. And maybe that's what Jesus was modeling for us. You know, Jesus did say, whenever you feed someone, you're feeding me, right? But what Jesus modeled for us was actually the sitting down and eating part of it, the more vulnerable portion of it. At this point, I want to invite those of you who are listening in, either here in the Zoom room or on Facebook Live, to ask a question if you have one. And I'm going to invite you to send those questions directly, if you're in Zoom, to Nicole Deeroff. Maybe Nicole, you can pop a little word in there and say, send your questions to me. Send them directly to Nicole. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can type your question into the comments. And we're going to try to monitor those questions and kind of work them into the flow of our conversation today. So while we're receiving questions, hopefully, Liz, I wonder how big is the concern for food insecurity? What can you tell us about food insecurity, and why should people of faith care?
Yeah, so obviously people are reading the news that in the time of COVID, food insecurity has shot up. That people do not have enough to eat. And this includes during COVID time, people who have housing, people who are who were okay in their life. I have stories from the church I'm serving of people calling that are crying. They have never had to ask for help before. It's a huge issue in the United States. And it's an issue. Food security and homelessness are not the same thing. Meals programs tend to reach people who a higher percentage are homeless, and food pantries reach people who a higher percentage are food insecure but have housing. And I guess the answer to me is fairly straightforward. If there are hungry people near you, Jesus has been explicit about what our call is. Mm-hmm. It is to care for those who are hungry. And I don't really see any way to get beyond that. And close to half of the food ministries in the United States are run by faith-based institutions. We are a significant part of the solution to this problem. Food insecurity is a systemic problem. I hope that people are working on the systems that make it so people do not have access to food. This book is about direct service, not about the systemic problems. In my experience, churches that work on the direct service part of it then start asking the questions and working with their denomination or with other groups, other social justice groups, to change the systemic problems. I think it's easier to know how to change the systemic problems if you know a lot of people who are food insecure. The people who are food insecure can be part of the work to change the systems. But our Christian witness is really not even is absolutely that if a person is hungry, we are called to do something about that.
Yeah, you address this so well in the book too. The difference between direct service and systems, or the distinction between justice and compassion. Compassion is, I see someone who's hungry, I make sure they have food to eat. Justice is the asking the question, why are so many people hungry in this wealthiest nation on the planet? And you make the point that it's not that we should shift from one to the other. It's a both and. We need both. We can't let people starve while we solve the problem. People need food 3 times a day, even while we're working to change the systems. Right. So I think that's such an important, I hear so many conversations in faith communities about the need to address justice issues and not just compassion. But sometimes in the process, we lose sight of the fact that the compassion issues still exist. We need to continue those even as we try to change systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That makes me want to add on a thing about church specifically, which is that one of the courses that I've taught in the past is evangelism for liberation. And one of the things I learned as I was wrestling with this book is that I think that evangelism and mission are the same thing. That people come to church because they're missing something, they need something. And the way we be good news is to meet the needs that people have. So people who are hungry come because they need food, but people who are lonely come because they need a chance to serve food. People who are disconnected come because they need a sense of belonging. So that in individual congregations, our work to feed people is how we are saying that we believe that there's good news in Jesus Christ. And the good news is that we get to serve people who need food. And everybody gets included in that. The people who need food want to do the serving as much as the people who have plenty of food.
Yes, amen. Okay, a couple of questions that are coming in. First, this question that I like a lot. How did this experience impact the congregation's worship life? This experience of developing relational food ministries, how did it impact the congregation's worship life?
Yeah, so I want to read a little bit from the Hope Lutheran Church in Reading.
Okay.
And then I'll say more about how it changed their life, because it changed it a lot.
And then I'm going to ask you how it changed your life. So you can anticipate that one.
Yes. Hope Lutheran Church has upstairs church on Sunday and downstairs church on Tuesday. I visit on a Tuesday during Lent. In a well-lit basement room, about 50 people gather for Hope's table. The group is racially diverse, and I have seen about half the members at upstairs church on the previous Sunday. Dinner opens with a prayer and an invitation to join the buffet line. Several people arrive while we are eating, and half an hour later, Mary, the priest, announces that worship will begin. A few people leave, and a few more arrive just in time for the worship. Mary takes prayer requests before the service starts, writing them down and interacting with folks to get the details of their story. She had done the same on Sunday. Then the service starts. We have bulletins at our seats next to our dirty plates, but most people know the responses without looking. A group of teens lead the first song, and Mary's sermon is a dialogue in which she asks the eaters to respond to questions and share their experiences. Two women off to the side continue their dinner conversation, occasionally laughing wildly, seemingly oblivious to the worship service. although their 3 children pay rapt attention to Mary. It's a church of about 30 people. It is a church that had a steady food pantry and a Sunday worship. It's a church that there was always discussion of whether it was time for this church to close. Mary was involved in the food pantry, went to the food pantry once a month, visited with people at the food pantry. And heard from the people at the food pantry that they needed a meal, that lots of people were coming to the food pantry that didn't have a way to cook, that they wished there was a meal. And she started that as a dinner church right from the beginning. So that church now, when I visited them 2 years after they had done that, still has 30 people at Sunday worship. It had 50 people at Tuesday worship. But the mix of who was at each of those services at the beginning was all people with houses upstairs and all people without houses downstairs. By the time I visited, you could not tell who was who. The guy with torn up jeans and chatting a bit during the Sunday worship, really not clearly paying attention, turned out to be a professional artist who has housing, who was very secure in his life. But I had assumed he was one of the homeless people joining. The person in a well-dressed in the evening worship turned out to be a person who was very careful about his clothing and had come early to get cleaned up for the worship service. This is a vibrant church that still on its rolls has 30 official members, but it has 80, 100 people who are in and out of that building. And I do want to say a word also about the youth that were singing and the youth that were at the table. I hear in my indoor church that I serve now all the time questions about where are youth? Why aren't youth involved in Christianity today? Well, every church that I visited that had shared ministry at their meals had teens and young adults very actively involved in their ministry. Everything about their ministry changed when they started having people who were food insecure belong to their group.
I'm not surprised, because when faith communities start to look outward instead of always navel gazing, that's attractive, like especially for young people whose patience for sort of sitting around and going through the motions, because that's the way we do church, is pretty thin, but who do find compelling being a part of something that's really making a difference. But I love the way you described that particular church, where there really isn't an us and them. There's no us and them. It's just all us.
It's all
and
us.
That to me is sort of a vision of the kingdom of God.
Yes.
So now I'm going to ask you about you, spiritually speaking.
Hey, Alan.
Yes.
We got a question of, could Liz just say the name of that congregation?
Oh, yeah.
You just shared the story of?
It's Hope Lutheran Church in Reading, Pennsylvania. The rector is Mary Wolf.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And Nicole, speaking of that, maybe you could drop the link in for the book, just so people can, we'll mention it again at the end, but can get the book where she tells that story. So for you, Liz, spiritually speaking, what have you learned from the people with whom you've been in shared ministry through Worcester Fellowship or through other food ministries that you wouldn't have gained or learned otherwise? How have you grown spiritually in ways that you wouldn't have apart from these relationships that God has put in your path?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. I actually joke about writing a book called Bringing Faith to the Faithful. The people who I have met on the streets and in these programs are so faithful in a way that I don't know how to be that faithful. And so everything about what it means to be faithful, I feel like I've learned from these people. But specifically, I started my doctoral thesis thinking that by getting people who are different from each other to talk to each other, that we would end racism, that we would have deep discussions about systemic problems. And that isn't what I found. But this idea that those relationships that were built became church has changed my definition of church. So at Worcester Fellowship, I said we had church and then we had Bible study when we got together afterwards. Well, now in retrospect, I realize that Bible study is church. That's the place we grapple with what Jesus is sending us to do. And lunch is church. That's the place that we grapple with what each other wants to do to live out our Christian mission. And so now that I'm serving in indoor church, my congregation was surprised when I showed up to the food pantry the first time it happened, because they saw it as a thing a volunteer does to feed people who aren't part of our church. But now I'm like, oh no, this is everybody who walks into our church is part of our church.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as the members, that's our job, to make that obvious, to make that clear, to be church rather than do church.
Yeah, and at the risk of heresy, Jesus probably would recognize more in that meal around the table, the messy meal and the leftovers and the dirty napkins and all that. He would maybe recognize more in that than he would in our very sterile formal communion, where we have little cups or we have sterilized everything and we form lines and everything, right? I mean, when Jesus said, whenever you eat this, whenever you break this bread, remember me. Whenever you drink this cup, he didn't necessarily mean brass, formal cups, right? I mean, Jesus would recognize more in that meal than in our communion services, right?
Right. My ordination is Disciples of Christ. We have communion every time we gather. It's one of our basic distinctives. So I certainly was caught up in that in starting to serve UCC. Why don't you do it our way? But then I was like, well, that's actually not enough either. How do we not treat every meal we have together? And honestly, our churches love potlucks. It would take so little to turn that potluck into our worship service.
Into a sacrament.
And it is a sacrament. Shantia has written every meal is a communion.
Amen.
That is the change in my understanding of what I'm called to.
Amen. We have about 5 minutes left. I did want to say that, first of all, Liz is more than happy to stick around for a few minutes. We're going to officially end the live stream and the recording at 1 o'clock, but we'll stick around for 15 or 20 more minutes if folks want to stay and have some conversation. That's number one. And number two, I think it's fair to say, Liz, that you'd be happy to make presentations in other settings, congregations, other events. So if folks want to know how to be in touch with Liz, feel free to reach out to Nicole or me and we can facilitate an introduction. We do have a couple of questions that have come through though in the chat related to food ministries and COVID. I don't know if you've thought about this a lot, but with masking and social distancing and public health concerns, how has this changed the way we include volunteers? How do we even approach these ministries?
So I'll say, number one, that the churches where lots of their volunteers were people who were food insecure, all are still doing their food ministries. Because the question of should we keep doing it or not did not become or not being a choice, because they knew the people who would not have dinner. If
people still need to eat, even during COVID.
Yes. Yeah. So I have done several workshops on how to adapt your ministry for COVID. And I would love to do that with anyone who's interested. I have called lots of places and visited lots of places who are keeping their ministry open. And there's lots of specific things that churches can do. to be safe. I will say also that in the early church, the first thing, the theory of how the church grew from being this small pockets of synagogues that were following Jesus to turning out to be this big movement, many people attribute that to the time of the plague. And Christians did this weird thing in the time of the plague. They went to people's houses and they washed their bodies and they fed them food. And it turns out the plague is not 100% death result, but it was 100% because the people who survived the plague then starved to death because they couldn't take care of themselves. So the early Christian church has these miracle stories where people survived the plague. It was a miracle. Also have stories where Christians got the plague and died. The risk they took was with their life. But because they believed that this life is not the only story, and because they believed that God is with us in everything they do, they took huge risks to care for their neighbor. And I would say that it is more important that we take risks to care for our neighbor than that we take risks to worship on Sunday. That if the risk taking is in this care for others, not in the meeting our own needs.
Thank you for that. Well, we are nearing the end of our time, and I want to make sure that if to give you an opportunity to talk about how people might find your book. I hope some people will buy your book. I know Nicole dropped the chat in there again, but if you have any thoughts about that, and also if folks wanted to find you, to reach out to you, to share some conversation with you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So the easiest way to find me is at elizabethmaemagill.com. That has a link to my email address, and that has a link to buying the book on Upper Room Books. It is available on Amazon also if you prefer that route, but Upper Room Books is the publisher of the book. And I have on there also a list of workshops that I offer. I don't think the COVID workshop is listed, but now that I've said that, I'll get that added on there of how to do COVID adaptations to your ministry.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time for today, but let me again say thank you, Liz, for joining us for this conversation today. Thanks again, Shantia and Jonathan, for making this introduction. Thank you, Liz, for writing this book. And thank you for your vision and your compassion and your ministry with all God's children. Thank you also to all of you who have joined us on Zoom or on Facebook Live. As I mentioned, Liz has graciously agreed to stick around for a few more minutes for any who would like to stay for a bit of Q&A or conversation. We're going to stop the recording in a moment, and we'll end the Facebook Live, but we will keep the Zoom meeting going for a few more minutes for those who want to stay for a bit of conversation. I wanted to end the formal portion of our gathering, though, with a blessing. And this is written by John O'Donohue from his book, To Bless the Space Between Us. This blessing is called Grace After Meals, and I'm going to adapt it just a touch. He writes, we end this meal, I'm going to say, we end this conversation with grace for the joy and nourishment of food, the slow time away from the world to come into presence with each other and sense the subtle lives behind our faces, the different colors of our voices, the edges of hungers we keep private, the circle of love that unites us. We pray the wise spirit who keeps us to change structures that make others hunger, and that after such grace, we might go now forth and impart dignity wherever we partake. So my friends, go in peace or stick around for a few more minutes for conversation with Liz. Thanks so much and blessings.